Hi guitarlings, I'm Gray at Hub Guitar, and today we're going to study the beautiful tune by Ulli Bögershausen, It Could Have Been. So this tune is not strictly speaking a beginner piece, but there are definitely parts within it that are very approachable for a beginner. So it's the kind of tune that beginners might like to study or have a try at, and yet there are other parts of it that are certainly more demanding and will require some more advanced techniques. Let's begin. We're going to start with a few pickup notes, open, 2, and 3. And then on measure 1, we're going to an E minor 9 chord. Notice that for the whole entire first 2 beats, I'm holding down that chord. And I've indicated a fingering of first finger or index finger on the 2nd fret, and 4th finger or pinky finger on the 4th fret. It's a very dramatic and certainly very sad chord to start on. And we've got another we're kind of repeating that pickup idea. So we've got open 1, 3, and now we're going to an A minor 7. Notice that I'm trying to fret that chord and really pluck it out without disturbing the other string. So once I've fretted the chord and I've plucked, so let's say, the first 2 notes, now, even when I arrive here, the 5th string and the 2nd string should still be ringing. So when I just touched that 2nd string, it was still ringing even as I got to beat 3. So it's very important not to disturb those notes that they're ringing. It's not really written here in the tab, but it's sort of implicit in all solo fingerstyle music that you want some nice sustain ordinarily. Otherwise, you have this. Sounds a bit choppy and doesn't really bring out the best character of the acoustic guitar in this piece, so try to get that extra note length. We're going on to measure 3. You might notice that I added a little hammer on. That's, something I ordinarily do when I see fretted notes being mixed with open strings. I'll sort of freely choose to hammer or pull some of them. And you'll notice that I've indicated on the tab that the first finger should be fretting the 1st fret of the 2nd string. And that's because I really want that in order to get to the next chord on measure 4. So it'd be pretty inconvenient if I chose the wrong finger there and then had to switch. I'd be kind of wasting a little bit of effort. So I want to set that up on the last note of measure 3 and then go to my chord on measure 4. Another thing that's not ordinarily written but is sometimes implicit or just freely interpreted is that when you've got a chord with multiple notes at once, you might like to just sort of slightly break them apart. That's called a glissando. It's almost like a little minor arpeggiation. You're just sort of breaking out the notes of the chord so that they can all be heard distinctly from each other. And many players like to do that because it lets you hear more detail in the chord. And then we've got this F sharp on beat 3 of measure 4. Notice that I'm going to hold on to that F sharp while I play the next few notes, and that's going to continue ringing. I don't want that choppy sound. That F sharp really belongs underneath the next 3 notes, supporting them harmonically. And then I go back to the idea we started on. And a pretty similar idea from measures 5, 6, and 7, almost a repeat. Not exactly a repeat, but mostly a repeat. And the last note of measure 7, that G, is going to continue to ring and hang over most of measure 8. Because that's the melody note. You really don't want to stop that short. It's sort of the resolution of the melody note, so it's going to continue ringing through most of measure 8. Now, at the end of measure 8, we've got this little pickup, 7, 8, and 10. So we can use our index, our middle finger, and our pinky finger. But it's crucial, however we do that we can quickly get into this bar pattern for measure 9. So this is actually an E minor bar chord. But what's important to note about this bar chord is I am not barring onto the 6th string, and that's because I need an open 6th string in measure 9. So if I start my bar all the way across like this, I've got the wrong note in the bass, and then I have to shift my bar down. It's almost always preferable to have less motion of the fretting hand, so I like to do that pick up and then bar up to the 5th string, and then I've got my open E string for measure 9. So above measure 9, you'll notice the marking for a bar chord, but it does not indicate that we are doing a partial bar. So just take note whenever you're doing a bar chord, how far do I have to bar across? Because remember, the further you go across, the more strength you're spending. So if the bar chord doesn't call for full coverage of a fret, just cover the strings that are needed. I've got this little melody at the end of measure 9, which I usually start off with my bar, so I don't have to lift up my bar just yet. And then I go to 8, and then I go to 10, and then I use that note on the 10th fret to pivot into the next chord, which begins measure 10. So this is actually a C add 9 chord. And what I do here is I've got my pinky on the 10th fret, which I had when I was ending that little melody there. And I've got my pinky on the 10th fret, and I reach my 3rd finger, or my ring finger, to the 10th fret of the 4th string. I put my middle finger on the 9th fret of the 3rd string, and my index finger on the 8th fret of the 2nd string. But I actually like to push down on strings 1 and 2 with my index finger, and in doing that I'm able to prepare the next notes that are coming. So when I go to that next note of the 8th fret of the 1st string, all I'm doing is lifting my pinky up. So that note is ready to go as soon as I want to play it. And then I'm keeping these 2 fingers, that's the ring and middle fingers, I'm keeping them on frets 10 and 9, and I'm stretching my 1st finger down to the 7th fret and putting my pinky finger on the 10th fret of the 2nd string for a new chord, which actually has the same 2 notes on the bottom as the previous chord. So I'm not changing the fingering of those 2. And you'll notice that in doing that, I'm able to sort of buy myself some time, a full quarter note's worth of time actually. And that time allows me to get the next 2 notes in place. That's the 7 and the 10 on beat 4 of measure 10. The same thing happens here as I go to measure 11. I've got that open string to start out with, and that gives me just enough time to move down to my half bar at the 5th position. And there I'm barring across strings 1, 2, and 3, and then I'm just doing the 7th fret of the 2nd string. And I've got another little melody there. Now this thing on measure 12, this is pretty tricky. This is a pretty big stretch. You might not even believe your eyes the first time you see it, but you're supposed to stretch from 3 to 8. And then you do get to resolve that 8 down to 7 and shrink that stretch a little bit. If you're having trouble with measure 12, Ulli Bögershausen was kind enough to share a trick with me that he likes to recommend to students who are having a difficult time. You can actually switch on measure 12, instead of having the 3rd fret of the big string, you can switch that to the open 4th string, and you can then do that with the 8th fret note as normal, and then you've got an open 3rd string, open 2nd string, and to the 7th fret, and that should give you just enough leeway that you can continue on without having that massive stretch from 3 to 8. In my own teaching, I often recommend these little adjustments or tricks to students, and often students are kind of reluctant. They want to play it the right way, and in this case, this comes directly from the composer as a recommended alternative. So I hope that you embrace it and then kind of revisit these difficult parts of the music, later on as you're feeling more ready to take them on. Now I like to slide my 1st and 4th finger down to have a similar shape with my index finger on the 2nd fret, and then I use my 2nd finger to resolve to the 3rd fret again on the high E string. Notice that as I move over to measure 13, I'm allowing that G to ring over on top of the chord because that's the melody. In fact, I still have it in place as I reach the and of beat 3 where I need it again. And I use my pinky for the 5th and 7th frets. By doing that, by leading with my pinky, I actually end up in the correct position that I need to be for measure 14, where I am now barring across the 5th fret. I've got a little bit of a 16th note on measure 15. For measure 16, I like to slide up to the 7th fret and then come back down to my 2nd finger. So all together that sounds like this. does take a bit of practice. Just remember to try to keep the melody independent. You want the melody to really continue and not get interrupted or kind of confused with other notes of the chord. Measure 17 should look familiar. We've got this little melody again, 7, 8, 10. Now on measure 18, I think this is one of the most difficult parts of the tune, but fortunately we can make another very small adjustment to this that would make it much easier to play. And this adjustment actually doesn't require us to change anything about the music. We're just changing the choice of frets. So as written, I've indicated that you should bar across the 5th fret with your index finger and then stretch all the way to the 10th fret with your pinky finger. And that's the first beat and a half. Now you just slide your pinky down to grab the 8th fret, but you're still pushing down hard on that 5th fret. And then you finish that out. That's pretty difficult. I find, maybe when I play that it does sound good, but it does not feel good. I can feel that physical exertion. It's difficult. But whenever you're in standard tuning and you see a 5th fret note, you can ordinarily shift it to an open string, right? So for example, that first note of measure 18 actually could be played as an open 5th string. And the 5th fret of the 4th string is the same as playing an open G string. And the 5th fret of the 3rd string is actually C, which we don't have on the B string. So we do have to grab a C in there somehow, but by then we should be able to reach it. So we've got open A, and then open G, and then we go down to the C here. And we could also do the next two as open strings again. We've got open A and open G, and then 7, 5. So if you're familiar with how notes on the guitar can be moved around, it can actually really save you. If you're finding that this is a struggle, I kind of recommend against pushing yourself up against a challenge that's going to take too long to solve. Maybe it's going to take you like 6 months or 18 months to really get your technique to the point where you can do that. And meanwhile, you deserve the benefit of being able to play this tune. So making these little adjustments is a really great idea so that you can move forward with your development as a player. You can always come back to them and revisit them later when you feel more ready. I don't think anyone's going to judge you for looking for alternatives to play this, because that's a pretty big one. In measure 19, we go from a D7 to a D7 sus4, and we can use that shape again for measure 20, and now we've got the pickup to measure 21. Kind of another repeat, right? Nothing new here. So now you see a first ending, second ending kind of thing. The first ending, we're going to go to this new idea at measure 29 with some little pull-offs. Nothing big there. 7, 8, 9 again. Now in measure 31, I'm going to actually bar all the way across to the 7th fret and get this interesting chord here with my second finger on the 8th fret of the 2nd string and my pinky on the 10th fret of the 1st string. I lift my pinky up to get the next note and put my pinky back down on the 10th fret of the 2nd string. And now we get to the second half of measure 31, where we've got this sort of diminished idea, 10, 11, 9, and 12, and I'm actually barring across the 9th fret there, and that's because after I play that, I actually need to lift up. That's my middle finger being lifted up to get the first chord on measure 32, and also the note on beat 2 of measure 32 is also the 9th fret. I move my pinky down to resolve that, and the note on beat 3 of measure 32 is also a 9th fret, so all of those are coming from that bar. So we've got this. And 11 and 11 are both coming from that chord. Now you'll see a very interesting thing. I'm rapidly shifting position to the 7th fret and getting both of those notes with my 7th fret bar, but then as soon as I've done that, I'm shifting down again and playing the next two notes, one of them with the bar and one of them with my pinky finger. So altogether, we have this idea. And that gets us to measure 33. So I think, in my opinion, that's probably the single most tricky part of the tune to navigate in terms of switching from one position and from one chord and from one coat to the other. So when you run into a spot like that, you want to really practice it a lot of times, like maybe 100 times. If you practice this tune ordinarily from start to finish, you'll find that that section, spots like that, will just sort of always be weak. The only way to really fix that is to pull them out of context, practice them over and over again, and put them back in their place. Now we're at measure 33 with a bar across the 7th fret. Measure 34 starts with another dominant 7, so that's 4. Resolving to the minor chord. And then we do this little sequence of dominant chords. So starting at the 5th fret to the 3rd fret to the 2nd fret. So you just remember that's kind of like if you think of your open A dominant 7th shape. That whole idea just kind of stems from moving that bar shape down from the 5th fret to the 3rd fret to the 2nd fret. So a lot of times seeing the underlying choreography, the underlying chord shapes is really the key to figuring out, making sense of all of the numbers on the tab. And now we're going to see the ending bracket of the repeat symbol. This tells us that we need to go all the way back to basically the beginning where we first saw that repeat symbol. And now we play up until the first ending, but instead of playing the first ending, we skip directly to the second ending, which is basically just a little coda. If there was ever a good time to put your own signature on a tune, it would definitely be at the ending. Your job was just to go back to Do. You've played from measures 1 through 36, gone back, played up to the first ending, and then jumped back to the second ending. So you're done, right? You've gotten back to Do, so you can add your own kind of fancy G major chord. You can do some harmonics, whatever you like. I think personally, I always like to punctuate the ending of a tune with a little bit of my own signature to it. So while we're here, let's talk about the form of this tune. We've got a pickup measure, and then we start at measure 1, and we play from measures 1 through measure 8. You'll notice that there's a lot of repeated content. In fact, some of that stuff comes back up again later on in the tune. So kind of keep a lookout for measures that are identical to other measures. That will help you to organize your practice and also help you to see, if you've played the first 8 measures, you've actually learned some of the content that you're going to encounter later. So it just helps you to learn a bit faster. At any rate, we're going to play from measure 1 all the way to measure 27, and that's where we see the instruction to take the first ending. So we follow the first ending all the way to measure 36. Now we see the second half of our repeat sign that we started with on measure 1, which means we jump back to measure 1. And this time we play again to measure 27, but since we've already played the first repeat, we just jump directly to the second repeat, which is the very last measure. So that's it for It Could Have Been. I don't know about you, but as I listen to this tune, I sort of feel a lingering nostalgia, wondering myself what it is that could have been. Thanks for watching.